In June 1996, the body of an 18-year-old woman was discovered inside her Idaho Falls apartment. Despite the collection of DNA, the identity of the perpetrator would remain unknown for over 2 decades. Angie Ray Dodge was born on December 21, 1977, in Vancouver, Washington, to her parents Jack and Carol Dodge. As the youngest of 4 children and their only daughter, Angie held a special place in the family. She began her educational journey in San Diego, California, where she attended preschool, before her family eventually settled in Idaho Falls, Idaho. There, Angie continued her schooling and quickly became known not only for her academic abilities, but also for her willingness to help others. During high school, she spent time tutoring younger children in subjects like math and English, offering guidance and support to those who struggled, further highlighting her generous spirit. In 1995, graduated from Idaho Falls High School with honors. Her academic excellence earned her a place at Idaho State University, where she enrolled shortly after graduation. In 1996, at just 18 years old, Angie had taken a significant step toward independence by moving into her first apartment in Idaho Falls. However, just 3 weeks after moving into her new apartment, something unexpected and deeply unsettling was about to unfold. On June 13th, Angie was assaulted and brutally stabbed to her end in that very apartment. When she failed to show up for work that morning, 2 of her co-workers became concerned and went to check on her. It was they who discovered her lifeless body and alerted the authorities. The Idaho Falls Police Department launched an investigation immediately, collecting evidence from the scene and interviewing people who had seen or interacted with Angie the night before. The investigators recovered male DNA and hairs from the crime scene and sent them for DNA analysis. Testing at the time revealed that the samples all belonged to a single unidentified male. Based on witness accounts and tips, the authorities believed that more than one person might have been involved in the attack. Despite not matching the DNA found at the scene, 20-year-old Christopher Tapp became a suspect in January 1997. The investigators theorized that Christopher may have been part of a group that committed the crime, which kept him under scrutiny despite the lack of physical evidence linking him directly to Angie's case. Christopher was subjected to more than 100 hours of intense interrogation by the police. During these sessions, he eventually confessed to the crime, but his statements were riddled with inconsistencies and contradictions. No physical evidence ever connected him to the crime scene. Still, based on his confession, which had been obtained under significant pressure, he was convicted in May 1998 of aiding and abetting. He was sentenced to a minimum of 30 years in prison, despite ongoing concerns about the legitimacy of his confession. In 2001, Christopher formally recanted his confession, claiming that he had been coerced by investigators and that they had fed him details about the crime. In 2007, his case attracted the attention of the Idaho Innocence Project. A professor and an undergraduate student at Boise State University reviewed the case and examined the interrogation tapes. They concluded that Christopher had been heavily pressured and manipulated into making a false confession. Their findings added momentum to the growing doubts surrounding his conviction. An appeal was filed in March 2017, and as a result, the assault charge against him was dismissed. This reduced his sentence from 30 years to 20. Having already served 20 years by that time, Christopher was released from prison. The wrongful conviction had taken 2 decades of his life. Dozens of people were waiting outside the court. Christopher, who appeared taken aback by the applause received, gave a short statement on the courthouse steps. He said, "I want to prove to everybody that I can be something and do something right." He said the following about being released. The world had changed. Cell phones ruled the world, and there was no more physical talking between people. That really bothered me when I first got home. Plus, in my mind, I was still a 20-year-old kid, but all my friends had kids, mortgages, and car payments. They had real lives. In October 2020, he filed a lawsuit against the city of Idaho Falls for his wrongful imprisonment. In June 2022, the city reached a settlement agreement with him for $11.4 million, acknowledging the significant injustice he had endured. As part of the legal agreement reached with the Bonneville County prosecuting attorney, the charge of first-degree slaying remained on his record, while the assault charge was officially dismissed. For over 2 decades, Carol Dodge refused to let her daughter's case be forgotten. Driven by grief and determination, she took an active role in the search for the truth, working closely with investigators and independently pursuing leads to find the second perpetrator. Carol conducted her own research, reached out to forensic experts, and stayed in close contact with the authorities to ensure that Angie's case remained a priority. The Idaho Falls Police Department also maintained their commitment, reaching out over the years to various law enforcement agencies, the FBI, the Attorney General's office, and forensic specialists to identify the individual whose DNA had been left at the crime scene. In 2016, the Idaho Falls Police Department partnered with Francine Bardold and the West Jordan Police Department in Utah. The investigators hoped that using the MVAC forensic DNA collection system would help extract additional touch DNA from previously collected evidence. The following year, they sought help from Parabon Nanolabs. They generated trait predictions from the crime scene DNA, producing a digital composite image of what the suspect might have looked like at age 25, based on traits like skin tone, eye and hair color, face shape, and freckling. In November 2018, Idaho Falls detectives intensified efforts with Parabon's newest advancements in DNA analysis. A short list of 6 individuals emerged through genealogical mapping. The investigators focused on the most promising lead, a man residing in Twin Falls. In February, a team was sent to covertly collect his DNA. They seized an opportunity when the man discarded chewing tobacco, which they hoped contained viable genetic material. Though testing was expedited, the results came back negative. His DNA did not match the profile left at the crime scene. Despite the setback, analysis of the DNA profile continued. Parabon's genetic genealogy work revealed that the Twin Falls subject was more distantly related to the true suspect than initially believed. Based on family tree positioning, it became unlikely that any of remaining 5 men were the source of the crime scene DNA. Then, in a crucial breakthrough, Parabon researchers located an old obituary in a small library's digital archive. The document mentioned a woman whose daughter had been briefly married into the same family line, a connection that had previously gone unnoticed due to the lack of children from that union. However, further details in the obituary revealed that the woman had a son, Brian Lee Dripp Sr., from a different relationship, one that still carried the suspect's family DNA. Parabon and the investigators traced this 7th individual through extended genealogical investigation. They discovered that Dripps had lived in Idaho Falls in 1996, directly across the street from the Dodge family. In 2019, he was located in Caldwell, Idaho. The detectives collected DNA from a cigarette but discarded from his vehicle, and the results revealed a conclusive genetic match to the DNA left at Angie's crime scene. Following his arrest, Dripps confessed during interrogation to both the assault and ending the life of Angie. He claimed that he had been heavily intoxicated on illegal substances and alcohol, and that he had intended only to assault her. Dripps insisted that he had acted alone. In February 2021, he pleaded guilty to the charges. At 55 years old, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 20 years. Carol, Angie's mother, reflected on her journey. She said, "My fight was to find my daughter justice. Every road I went down, somebody tried to put up a barricade or a roadblock. Everywhere I turned, somebody said, 'You cannot do this,' or 'You cannot do that.' I said, 'Just stand back and watch me do it.'" In April 1982, an 8-month-old girl vanished from her mother's arms during a violent altercation in Ohio, setting off a decades-long mystery. The last time Alyssa Williams was seen alive was on April 29, 1982, when her father Isaiah Williams forcibly took her from the arms of her mother, Denise Frazier Daniel, during a violent encounter at a friend's home in Ohio. At the time, Denise had been staying with a friend to escape the repeated abuse she suffered at the hands of Isaiah. On the day Elisa disappeared, she responded to a knock at the door and found Isaiah standing outside. In her words, "He hit me in the face and I fall back, and that was when he grabbed her," and Elisa's crying. She recalled chasing after him in a panic before returning to the house and immediately calling the police. Although the officers quickly apprehended Isaiah, the child was not in his custody. During questioning, he gave vague and shifting explanations about Elisa's whereabouts. He reportedly told the officers that he had left the child with relatives unknown to Denise. His inconsistent statements and alleged claims of memory loss complicated the investigation, allowing him to avoid formal charges for many years. Despite being the primary person of interest from the outset, the authorities lacked the evidence to move forward with prosecution at the time. Throughout the years, Isaiah remained on the radar of investigators. His history of domestic violence against Denise was well documented. In a significant development, both his brother and one of his former wives came forward and informed the investigators that they had seen Alyssa with Isaiah in early July of 1982. They noted that the child appeared to be in good health during those sightings. Another ex-wife of Isaiah provided crucial information. She told the police that she was with Isaiah during the early hours of July 10, 1982, when he placed the child into his car and drove away around 2 or 3 a.m. According to her account, he returned later that morning at approximately 11 a.m. without the child. She stated that he then loaded her belongings into his car and dropped her off at work. Furthermore, when she stayed overnight at his home again on July 22nd, she reportedly saw no sign of Alyssa, suggesting the child had not been returned. In early 1983, Isaiah appeared in court for violating a restraining order. During that appearance, he claimed that while driving in the summer of 1982, he consumed alcohol and smoked marijuana before pulling over to sleep. When he awoke, he alleged that Alyssa was gone and assumed Denise had taken her. Over the years, Isaiah made conflicting statements, at times telling Denise directly that he ended their child's life, while telling the investigators he had no recollection of the events, citing memory loss due to a car crash. The case eventually went cold, but was reopened almost 4 decades later in 2021. A renewed investigation by the Ann Arbor Police Department was done, though Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel's office did not reveal what new evidence was uncovered. They stated that the authorities believed Williams took Elisa's life as a means of exerting control over her mother. Williams had a violent past, including a conviction for assault with intent to commit great bodily harm after beating an ex-wife with an 8-foot board. He served 10 years in prison for that crime. In October 2021, 76-year-old Williams was finally charged. The charge was filed in Washtenaw County's 15th District Court. The road to trial was prolonged due to an extended extradition process, but by May 2023, Williams was officially bound over for trial in Washtenaw County. The long-awaited trial culminated on May 10, 2024, when a jury found Isaiah Williams guilty. Though Alyssa's body was never recovered, the court determined that the evidence was sufficient to hold Williams accountable. In July, following the guilty verdict, Williams was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, closing one of Michigan's oldest cold cases. Elisa's mother, Denise, read a victim impact statement at the sentencing hearing. She told the court, "Isaiah's silence is a cruelty beyond measure. You have taken from me the most precious gift from God, and now you deny me the chance to lay her to rest. You may think that your silence will protect you, but it will only add to your guilt and shame. You may have taken my Alyssa's life, but you will never take away my love for her, and I pray somehow I will be able to bring her home to rest." In November 1983, a motorist driving in Delray Beach, Florida stumbled upon the horrifying sight of a lifeless body. For decades, no leads emerged and the person responsible remained free. Carla Lowe was born in 1962. At 21 years old, she lived in Pompano Beach, located in Broward County, Florida. On November 13, 1983, Carla's life came to a tragic and violent end. Her lifeless body was discovered lying in the middle of Depot Avenue, near the Delray Beach Amtrak station. The scene was disturbing. Carla had been brutally beaten and then run over. It was clear that her demise had not been accidental. A man driving down Depot Avenue that early morning was the first to come across her body. What he thought might be debris in the road turned out to be far worse. Stunned and horrified, he quickly dialed 911 to report what he had found. The call was placed with urgency, and within minutes, the officers from the Delray Beach Police Department were dispatched to the scene. When the officers arrived, They confirmed the caller's worst fears. The young woman found on the road was declared deceased at the scene. Her identity was soon confirmed as Carla, a beloved member of her community. The police launched an investigation immediately. Crime scene specialists worked tirelessly, combing the area for any shred of evidence. Witnesses were questioned, nearby properties were canvassed, and every available lead was pursued. She was waiting for a train at the local Amtrak station when she was attacked, beaten to her end, and run over by a car. The police found her car, a 1963 Mercury Comet, in a field located just east of 1135 West Atlantic Avenue. Yet, as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the investigation yielded no clear answers. Despite the investigators' efforts, no arrests were made and the case went cold. In late 2021, nearly 4 decades after Carla's case was opened, Delray Beach's Cold Case Unit revisited the long-dormant investigation. This renewed effort was made possible by advancements in forensic technology. Using the Foster Plus Freeman Recover system, an advanced latent fingerprint development method, the investigators were able to retrieve fingerprint evidence that had not been recoverable back in 1983. The recovered fingerprints were submitted for analysis, and the results were both conclusive and chilling. They matched Ralph Williams, a man who had actually been questioned during the original investigation in 1983, but had never been charged. At the time, there had not been enough evidence to link him definitively to the crime. On the day she was found, he was taken into custody on grand theft auto and burglary charges, but they could not connect him to this case. Williams had been living in Jacksonville, Florida at the time of this forensic discovery. The investigators tracked him down and the fingerprint evidence provided the missing link they had long needed. His connection to the crime scene was no longer speculative. It was scientifically confirmed. In November 2021, Williams was arrested in Jacksonville. He was charged in the first degree. The authorities wasted no time in beginning the legal process to ensure he would face those charges in the appropriate jurisdiction. He was quickly extradited from Jacksonville to Palm Beach County, where the original crime had taken place. Jackie Lowe Repass, Carla's sister, said the following of Williams' arrest: "It means everything to me. 38 years I have waited for this. He took a very beautiful person out of this world. There is a name now to who did this to my sister." Before his trial in November 2022, Williams said that he was dissatisfied with his defense and sought to hire his own attorney, but he had a change of heart and accepted a plea that keeps him from serving any prison time. He was sentenced to 365 days in the county jail and 10 years of probation. 60-year-old Williams would then be released from jail after receiving credit for time served. Jackie said, "It is not justice. It is just not justice. Him being cocky the way he is decided that he did not want to take the plea." Jackie said that she and the other family members did not really want a plea to begin with, but they understood it. She said it should be a first-degree charge. It was like it happened all over again. Palm Beach County State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg said, she added that she wants people to know that her late sister was a good and generous person. She said, "She just was not a piece of trash that someone threw away." In September 1977, a speeding driver crashed a stolen car off a rural highway near Delafield, Wisconsin. The man was ejected and lost his life instantly. With no identification, his identity remained a mystery for over 4 decades. On September 14, 1977, in the early hours of the morning, a deputy from the Waukesha County Sheriff's Department attempted to stop a speeding vehicle. The driver ignored a stop sign, lost control of the car, and veered off the highway. The crash proved fatal as the driver, who was the only person in the vehicle, was ejected. The scene of the accident was located 7.5 miles east of Delafield, Wisconsin. Following the crash, the investigators identified that the vehicle had been reported stolen from Gurnee, Illinois. This added a layer of complexity to the case, suggesting potential criminal intent or behavior associated with the vehicle's final journey. Despite efforts to uncover more about the incident, there was little to directly connect the driver to any established identity at the time. The autopsy conducted by a forensic pathologist revealed that the deceased was a white male, estimated to be between 20 and 30 years old. He measured 6 feet tall, weighed approximately 155 pounds, and had brown hair cut in a military style. These physical characteristics provided a general profile, but were not enough to make an immediate identification. Among the items recovered from the vehicle was an object bearing the name John. While investigators were able to confirm that the name did not match the registered owner of the stolen vehicle, they could not determine whether it belonged to the deceased, was an alias, or was completely unrelated. The mystery surrounding the driver's identity persisted for decades. In October 2019, the long unsolved case of the unidentified man, known as Delafield John Doe, 1977, was reopened by a deputy medical examiner. The case was referred to the DNA Doe Project. A DNA sample was successfully sequenced, creating a viable genetic profile that could be uploaded to public DNA databases, such as GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. By mid-2020, genealogists from the DDP began the challenging task of constructing a family tree using the genetic data. The process proved to be complex and time-consuming, involving extensive research and analysis. Despite the difficulties, the team was able to provide the medical examiner with some initial insights, including potential surnames linked to the unidentified man's genetic matches. One of the crucial breakthroughs came when a marriage record was discovered. This document led the medical examiner to a specific individual who closely matched the profile they had been working to identify. In November 2021, this lead pointed to John Lindbergh Scott, and to confirm the theory, DNA was obtained from his sister, Jean Nunn. The comparison yielded a conclusive match. John, born on May 6, 1950, was originally from Bristol, Tennessee. At the time of his demise, he was 27 years old. John faced personal difficulties that led to a growing distance between him and his family. These struggles, though unspecified, appeared to push him toward a solitary existence. As time went on, his disconnection from familial ties deepened and he became increasingly isolated. This emotional and social withdrawal may have played a part in his eventual descent into minor criminal activity. The medical examiner stated, "And it is such a blessing to be able to finally give him his name back and offer his family some answers as to where he has been all these years." Reflecting on the journey to bring John home, the medical examiner added, "One night in January 1982, 2 women vanished separately while hitchhiking through the snowy mountain roads of Breckenridge, Colorado. Preserved DNA would lead the investigators to a suspect decades later. Barbara Oberholzer was born in 1952 and was affectionately known as Bobby Joe. At the age of 29, she split her life between Racine, Wisconsin, where she was raised, and Alma, Colorado, where she had built a new chapter of her life. People who met Barbara were often drawn in by her openness and warm personality. Her real education came from life experience, particularly the transformation she underwent after moving to Colorado. In Breckenridge, Barbara secured a position as a receptionist at a mining company. It was a role she took seriously, showing both reliability and professionalism that did not go unnoticed. Recently, she had received a promotion, a moment of recognition that filled her with pride and excitement. Her professional life was on the rise, and she looked forward to what the future held. Barbara shared her life in Alma with her husband, Jeff Oberholzer. Their relationship was described as happy and steady, a partnership that appeared both loving and rooted in mutual respect. Like many residents of the area during that time, Barbara adopted local customs that were part of daily life, including hitchhiking. In small mountain towns, hitchhiking was not considered risky. It was practical, widely accepted, and part of the culture. But beneath the calm rhythm of her routine, danger was quietly approaching. Barbara had no way of knowing that the freedom and peace she cherished would soon be taken from her. Annette K. Schnee was born on September 16, 1960 in Iowa. Though her early years began in the heartland, much of her upbringing took place in Wisconsin, where she spent most of her childhood. In search of independence and new opportunities, Annette eventually relocated to Colorado, settling in the town of Frisco. Annette's move to Colorado was driven by her desire to build a life of her own. She was known to be sweet and soft-spoken, yet there was no mistaking her ambition. She held clear goals for her future, with dreams of one day becoming a flight attendant. To support herself and move closer to her dreams, Annette juggled 2 jobs. During the day, she worked as a housekeeper at a Holiday Inn in Frisco. In the evenings, she took on shifts as a cocktail waitress at a local bar. Without a car, Annette relied on hitchhiking to travel to and from her jobs, just as many others in the area did. Annette, like many of her peers, viewed it as a normal part of daily life. She had plans, and she was steadily working toward them, never wavering in her quiet pursuit of a better tomorrow. But the promise of that tomorrow would never arrive. On January 6, 1982, 29-year-old Barbara Oberholzer had been hitchhiking south of Breckenridge, Colorado. That evening, she was last seen around 7:50 p.m., leaving the village pub, where she had met friends for drinks. When she failed to return home, her husband Jeff and close friends began searching for her immediately, fearing something had gone wrong. Their fears were confirmed the next afternoon. On January 7th, at approximately 3 p.m., Barbara's body was discovered about 10 miles south of Breckenridge, lying on her back down a snowy embankment along Colorado State Highway 9. The location was about 300 feet from a small parking lot at the summit of Hoosier Pass, at an elevation of 11,000 feet. The investigators quickly assessed the grim scene. Conditions at the time of her demise were believed to be dark, freezing, and possibly snowing. The medical examiner determined that Barbara's life was ended from a gunshot wound to the chest, inflicted by a handgun. A second bullet had grazed her right breast, and the authorities concluded she had been shot at the site where her body was found. Her body was frozen due to the frigid temperatures, and her hands were close together, with zip ties around her left wrist. Along with her body, the detectives found a few puzzling clues. An orange-colored booty sock, traces of blood on one of her winter gloves, and a keychain nearby. Barbara's purse, however, was found much farther away, 20 miles south of the body, on U.S. Highway 285 heading toward Denver. The weapon was never recovered, and the poor weather conditions offered no further evidence. That same evening, 21-year-old Annette K. Schnee was also hitchhiking south of Breckenridge. She had left a local pharmacy around 4:45 p.m., likely heading toward one of her jobs. When she did not show up for work the next day, the manager of the Holiday Inn where she was employed reported her missing. For months, there were no answers. Then, on July 3rd, nearly 6 months later, her body was discovered by a 13-year-old boy. Annette was found lying face down in the icy waters of Sacramento Creek, roughly 20 miles south of Breckenridge. The cold stream had helped preserve her remains, offering the investigators some physical evidence to work with. Annette was fully clothed, though her clothing appeared disheveled, but she was indecently assaulted. The medical examiner determined that she, too, had lost her life from a gunshot wound, this time to the back, likely from a handgun. No bullet was recovered from the scene. One detail immediately stood out to the investigators. Annette was wearing one orange-colored booty sock. The match to that sock had been found months earlier with Barbara's body. This chilling connection stunned the police. The 2 women were both locals, both disappeared the same day, and both had been shot with a medium-caliber revolver. Their bodies were found miles apart and months apart, yet the similarities suggested one horrifying conclusion. Their lives had been ended by the same individual on the same night. As the police tried to piece together the timeline, suspicion fell on Barbara's husband, Jeff Oberholzer. The investigators learned that Jeff had previously picked up Annette while she was hitchhiking and had given her his business card. He admitted this, but claimed it had been an innocent interaction and that he had never seen her again. From the start, Jeff asserted he had a solid alibi. He said he had been at home that night with a friend. However, when questioned, he was unable to produce that witness, further deepening suspicions. Years passed without resolution. Then, in December 1990, Jeff's alibi witness finally came forward. After verifying his account, the investigators with the Summit County Sheriff's Department cleared Jeff as a suspect in both crimes. Despite early doubts, Jeff had always maintained his innocence and was officially removed from suspicions. Jeff said it was very painful being under suspicion from not only the authorities, but also being tried in the court of public opinion. People did not want a suspected perpetrator in their house. The DNA evidence from the crime scenes had been meticulously preserved over the decades. In a renewed effort to solve the cold case, the investigators entered the genetic material into a public genealogy database. For several years, the detectives and genetic researchers worked quietly, using familial DNA tracing to identify possible relatives of the unknown suspect. This advanced forensic approach eventually led to a familial match, narrowing down the search to a specific lineage and, ultimately, to a man named Alan Lee Phillips, a retired mechanic. To confirm the match and ensure the validity of the lead, the investigators discreetly obtained a DNA sample from Phillips. They recovered a napkin that he had discarded in a public trash can, careful to maintain the chain of custody and eliminate any possibility of contamination. The DNA on the napkin was then compared to the genetic material recovered from the crime scenes. The results were conclusive. Phillips' DNA matched the DNA evidence connected to the cases of both Barbara Jo Oberholzer and Annette K. Schnee. On February 24, 2021, law enforcement officials conducted a traffic stop and took Phillips into custody. After nearly 4 decades of uncertainty, there was finally a suspect formally linked. The prosecutors charged Phillips with 2 counts each of slaying with deliberation, first-degree kidnapping, and first-degree assault with a weapon. The trial proceeded with careful attention to the decades of preserved evidence and the newly confirmed DNA match. It was revealed that on the night the crimes took place, Phillips' truck became stuck in a raging snowstorm. The authorities had launched an all-out effort to rescue, having no idea of the crimes that he just committed. He used his truck's headlights to signal SOS in Morse code. A sheriff flying overhead on a commercial jetliner spotted the signal and made a call. Dave Montoya, a local fire chief, helped Phillips and mentioned that he had a prominent bruise on his face. He told Dave that he got it when he fell while wandering around in the snow. But now, it is thought to have been Barbara that hit him in the face with a special brass keyring made by her husband, Jeff. He specifically made it for her in case she ever encountered trouble while hitchhiking. On August 31, 2022, a jury found Phillips guilty of the charges against him. The court sentenced him to 2 consecutive life terms. However, the resolution was short-lived. Less than 6 months after beginning his sentence, Phillips took his own life while in prison. He was 72 years old. Though he never offered a confession or explanation for his crimes, his conviction ensured that he was held accountable before his demise. In March 1966, the town of Surfside, Florida was shattered by an unthinkable crime. A young man was kidnapped and never seen again. Danny Goldman was born on March 29, 1948 and raised in Surfside, Florida, located just north of Miami Beach. The only child of Aaron and Sally Goldman, Danny grew up in a warm and supportive household. At school, Danny maintained a strong academic record, consistently performing well without ever falling into trouble. Teachers described him as focused and mature beyond his years. At the time, Danny was a senior at Miami Beach High School and was just days away from turning 18. His future looked bright with plans already set to attend the University of Miami. Danny and his parents were asleep in their home in the early morning hours of March 28, 1966, when their lives were violently upended. At approximately 4:30 a.m., a husky man with a noticeable limp broke into their house through an unlocked sliding glass door. The intruder, wearing a cap but no mask and holding a gun, entered their bedroom and addressed them by their first names. Calm but threatening, he demanded $10,000 in cash, a sum far beyond what the Goldmans had readily available. When Aaron and Sally explained that they did not have that amount of money in the house, the man became more aggressive. He abruptly declared that he would take a hostage instead. "I am going to hold Danny for security," he told them, before raising his demand to $25,000. The calm of the night shattered as the man bound Danny with cords and tape, physically restraining him and forcing him into the family's car. The intruder drove off into the dark, taking Danny with him, leaving Aaron and Sally behind in stunned horror. The kidnapper had told the Goldmans he would call at 6 p.m. with further instructions, but that call never came. Danny, who was one day away from turning 18, was never seen again. In the following days, the car was found abandoned, but there were no other traces, no notes, no calls, and no sightings. What began as a terrifying home invasion quickly turned into a full-scale missing persons investigation. The authorities scoured the area and followed every lead, but no conclusive evidence ever surfaced. It was as if Danny had vanished into thin air. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, hope began to dwindle. The search for Danny continued with intensity, but frustration grew with each end. The investigators worked to determine the motive behind the abduction. Was it a random act, or did the kidnapper know more about the family than initially assumed? Despite public interest and media coverage, no solid suspect emerged. The absence of demands and the abrupt silence deepened the mystery. Danny's friend, David Graubart, said, "We thought he would be back in 2 or 3 days somehow with this crazy story to tell." Aaron and Sally Goldman lived the rest of their lives without ever learning what happened to their only child. Aaron passed away in 2010, followed by Sally in 2012. The sorrow of Danny's disappearance remained with them until the end. An open wound that time never managed to heal. They never received answers, justice, or closure. Their home, once filled with the plans and dreams of a bright young man, remained a place marked by loss. Danny's friends refused to let his story fade. Determined to keep his memory alive, they worked to ensure his disappearance would not be forgotten. They kept his case alive in the public eye, sharing his story and continuing to press for answers. The group of devoted friends who came to call themselves the Posse committed themselves to uncovering the truth behind Danny's disappearance. The members are David Graubart, his younger brother, Joe, and their friends Anthony Blake, Harvey Lisker, and Paul Novak. Paul, who used his own money to chase down leads, said, "Basically, our decision was that it would be completely wrong for Danny to be forgotten. How does a 17-year-old get taken out of his family home at 5 in the morning and then years later it was just almost like it did not happen and he did not happen?" Danny did not have brothers or sisters and his parents were gone. We decided it was not going to go down like that. What began as a mission to find answers for a long-lost friend slowly evolved into a detailed investigation that unraveled a dark and complex web of corruption, betrayal, and organized crime. Their work eventually led to a startling revelation. The motive for Danny's abduction had nothing to do with ransom. Instead, it was tied to actions taken by his father, Aaron, years earlier. Actions that placed the family in the crosshairs of powerful enemies. Aaron Goldman, a board member at the now-defunct 5 Point Bank, had raised concerns to federal agents about suspicious and unsecured loans flowing through the institution. These loans, distributed in the form of cash and assets, were being funneled to local figures and even government officials. While Aaron may not have initially realized the bank was a front for a money laundering operation, his complaints threatened to expose a deep criminal network. His decision to alert the authorities set off a chain of events that would lead to fatal consequences. Mobsters tied to the laundering operation viewed Aaron's whistleblowing as an unforgivable betrayal. The posse spent a decade, from 2012 to 2022, combing through old documents, case files, and testimonies. They pieced together a timeline stretching back nearly a century, pulling the thread of corruption that linked political influence, financial fraud, and organized crime. Their relentless pursuit finally bore fruit when they uncovered a piece of overlooked evidence, a fingerprint left on the sliding glass door the night Danny was taken. The investigators at the time had missed its significance, but decades later, it proved pivotal. The fingerprint belonged to mob associate George DeFeece, the man who had kidnapped Danny. It was revealed that DeFeece had not put on his gloves until after entering the Goldman residence, a critical mistake that ultimately revealed his identity. Another clue, a Canadian-made rubber glove, further tied DeFeece to the scene. One of the members of the posse, Paul, traced the glove back to a Brooklyn clinic, which was the only facility in the area that used that specific type of glove. Records confirmed that DeFeece had once been a patient there and had resided in New York during the time of the abduction. Further investigation pointed to Joe Cacciatore, a known associate of DeFeece, as his accomplice. The two men had worked together in the underworld and, as the evidence indicated, collaborated in Danny's kidnapping and fatality. It is believed that they disposed of Danny's body by throwing him into the Atlantic Ocean, ensuring he would never be found. Both DeFees and Cacciatore have since passed away, leaving no opportunity for justice to be served in court. However, for those closest to Danny, knowing the truth brought long-awaited closure. Among the most heart-wrenching discoveries was a handwritten letter from Sally, Danny's mother. In it, she pleaded with the authorities and the public not to forget her son. Though she passed without knowing what happened, her wish was ultimately fulfilled by the posse, who honored her plea through their tireless work. Danny's remains have never been recovered, but his friends take comfort in knowing they kept their promise. The mystery of Danny Goldman's disappearance has finally been solved, bringing a measure of peace to those who never gave up. In June 1995, the lifeless body of a young girl was found in Atlanta, Georgia. Years later, the case would be linked to another, but it would take decades for the perpetrator to be identified. Nicole Smith was born in 1981. As a student, she attended a local middle school where she excelled academically. One of the milestones she eagerly anticipated was her upcoming middle school graduation. Nicole dreamed of wearing a beautiful white dress for the ceremony, a tradition that held deep significance for her. It was a symbol of pride, achievement, and the bright path she envisioned ahead. On the morning of June 7th, 1995, 14-year-old Nicole began her day just like any other. She left home with her sister and a group of friends, walking to school along the familiar streets of Campbellton Road. It was a route she had taken many times before, a daily ritual that felt safe and routine. As they walked, Nicole suddenly realized she had forgotten an important assignment. Determined not to let her hard work go to waste, she made the decision to return home and retrieve it. In an effort to save time, she took a shortcut through a wooded area near an apartment complex. It was a choice made with the intention of responsibility and diligence, values that had always guided her. But the decision led her into an isolated place where an unimaginable act of violence awaited. The police later reported that while taking the shortcut, Nicole was assaulted and shot twice in the face by an unknown man. The brutality of the attack stunned the community. Not long after the crime, her body was discovered by someone who quickly contacted authorities. The detectives with the Atlanta Police Department immediately sprang into action following the discovery of her body. They interviewed witnesses, canvassed the neighborhood, and pursued every possible lead. Community members came forward with information, and the investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the events of that tragic morning. Despite their commitment and the urgency surrounding the case, answers remained elusive. As the years passed and viable leads diminished, the case eventually went cold, leaving Nicole's family and community without justice or closure. Nearly a decade later, in 2004, a significant development reignited the investigation. Another young black teenager, 13-year-old Betty Brown, reported being indecently assaulted in the southwest Atlanta suburb of East Point. The investigators collected DNA evidence from the assault, and the results delivered a chilling revelation. The DNA matched that of Nicole's case. While this confirmed that the same person had committed both crimes, it still left detectives with one critical gap. They did not know the identity of the man behind the attacks. Years continued to pass without resolution. Then, in January 2022, the Atlanta Police Department made a groundbreaking announcement. Through the use of forensic genetic genealogy, the authorities had finally solved both cases. This advanced technique, which combines DNA analysis with genealogical research, allowed the investigators to trace family trees and pinpoint the suspect's identity. The breakthrough finally came nearly 27 years after the crime. The man responsible was identified as Kevin Arnold, a 49-year-old who had passed away just 5 months earlier in August 2021 from liver and kidney failure. His demise meant he would never face trial or be held accountable in a courtroom for the pain he caused. For Nicole's family, the identification of Kevin Arnold marked a complicated form of closure. It was a resolution that came without the possibility of prosecution or public reckoning, but it was a conclusion nonetheless. Nicole's mother said, "I never imagined this person would be deceased. So many unanswered questions I had for him that I can never ask and get answers, but I would never say it was closure for me because I will live for this pain for the rest of my life. She shared a hug with the other victim, Betty. Betty then said, in February 1977, a young mother was found lifeless in the back seat of her own Volkswagen Beetle, parked at an unfamiliar apartment complex in San Jose, California. For 48 years, the case remained cold. Jeanette Ralston lived a quiet life marked by hard work and dedication to her young son. In her early 20s, she relocated to the Bay Area, determined to create a more stable and promising future for her family. At just 24 years old, she was focused on rebuilding her life and providing for her child. Everything changed on February 1st, 1977. Jeanette was found lifeless in her Volkswagen Beetle, parked at an apartment complex where she had no known ties. The vehicle was located only minutes away from a bar she had visited with friends the previous night. Her body had been crammed into the tight space behind the front seats, suggesting an effort to conceal her. The authorities later confirmed that Jeanette had been indecently assaulted and strangled with a piece of her own clothing, specifically the sleeve of her shirt. The person responsible had also tried to burn the vehicle, possibly in an attempt to destroy evidence, but the fire never took. These disturbing details pointed to a violent and calculated act, yet the investigation quickly stalled due to a lack of immediate leads. Witnesses from the bar recalled that Jeanette left with an unknown man, assuring her friends she would return shortly. Her final words, "back in 10 minutes, were the last anyone heard from her. The investigators were given a description of the man, which was later turned into a composite sketch, but no one came forward to identify him. A carton of Eve cigarettes was retrieved from the vehicle among other items, yet the limited forensic tools of the time hindered deeper analysis. Despite the evidence gathered early on, the case eventually went cold. Nearly 5 decades passed without answers. The investigators from the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Cold Case Unit, working alongside the San Jose Police Department, took another look at the evidence from the 1977 crime scene. This time, they applied modern forensic methods that had not been available during the initial investigation. Their re-examination led to a breakthrough. A fingerprint on the pack of Eve's cigarettes was reanalyzed and stood out as a potential lead. In August 2024, the fingerprint was matched to Willie Eugene Sims, a 69-year-old man living in Ohio. Back in 1977, Sims had been a 21-year-old private in the United States Army, stationed at Fort Ord in Monterey County, placing him in California at the time of the crime. The investigators traveled to Ohio to obtain a DNA sample directly from Sims. That, along with other existing pieces of evidence, began to form a solid case. DNA found under Jeanette's fingernails and on the shirt sleeve used to strangle her, along with the original sketch provided by her friends decades earlier, helped confirm the connection. Additional records reveal that Sims had a violent criminal history in 1978, just a year after Jeanette's demise. He was convicted in Monterey County for assault with intent to end someone's life and was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. Despite that conviction, he managed to avoid further legal trouble in the years that followed. After serving his time, he moved out of California long before the implementation of CODIS, the National DNA Database, so his DNA had never been added to the system. In May 2025, once the fingerprint match was confirmed and supported by DNA evidence, Sims was arrested in Jefferson, Ohio, and formally charged. If convicted, he faces a maximum sentence of 25 years to life in prison. After 48 long years, Jeanette's family finally received the news they had been waiting for. Her son, Alan Ralston, who was only 6 years old when his mother lost her life, expressed deep gratitude to the cold case investigators and law enforcement officials who never gave up. He shared that the arrest brought a sense of closure that had been missing for decades, offering his family long overdue peace after so many years spent living without answers. He said, what a great Mother's Day gift and birthday present rolled into one. He was only days away from his 55th birthday. My whole life I've never understood what Mother's Day even means. In August 1987, a husband returned to his quiet home in High Ampham, Northern California, to find his wife mysteriously missing. An anonymous package containing some of her skeletal remains were received, but decades would pass before this case was solved. In February 1993, a man walking along the beach at Trinidad Head on the California coast came across a human skull. At the time, the authorities were unable to identify the remains. A DNA profile was developed from the skull, but when checked against the combined DNA index system, no match was found and the case went cold. Decades later, in May 2025, thanks to advances in DNA technology and the efforts of Othram DNA analysts, the identity of the skull was finally confirmed. It belonged to Kay Josephine Medine. Kay Adams, also known as Kay Medine, was born in 1939. Kay was a dedicated elementary school teacher who lived in Hyam Pem in Trinity County, Northern California. She worked at the Hyam Pem School and shared her life with her husband, Nicholas Medine. They were blessed with a daughter. The daughter's DNA was used in the identification. On August 3, 1987, Nicholas returned to his home after a business trip, only to discover that his wife Kay was missing. Upon entering their residence, he immediately noticed something was wrong. Kay's purse, glasses, and car were all still at the house, items she would not have left behind if she had gone anywhere voluntarily. Deeply alarmed, Nicholas contacted the authorities to report his 48-year-old wife as missing. He explained to law enforcement that he had been away and came home to an unsettling silence and no sign of Kay. The Trinity County Sheriff's Office responded swiftly, launching a search of the Medine property and the surrounding woods in the remote Hyampim area. Despite their efforts, no evidence of Kay's whereabouts was uncovered. As the investigation officially began, law enforcement focused on gathering as much information as possible. Friends, neighbors, and family members were interviewed to piece together Kay's last known movements. However, these conversations yielded no significant leads. Nothing in her behavior suggested that anything was amiss. Her sudden disappearance puzzled those closest to her. The absence of any signs of struggle or forced entry only deepened the mystery. As word of Kay's disappearance spread, the community rallied to support the search. Volunteers combed the rugged terrain surrounding the Medine home, navigating the dense forests and steep slopes of the Trinity Mountains. Despite the challenging environment and their best efforts, no trace of Kay was found. Each day that passed without answers only added to the growing sense of unease. Several months after Kay's disappearance, in November of 1987, the investigation took a grim turn. The sheriff's department in neighboring Humboldt County received a chilling package from an anonymous sender. Inside the package was a disturbing combination: an anonymous letter and some of Kay Adams' skeletal remains. The letter provided specific details, directing the investigators to the location of additional remains. Following the instructions in the letter, law enforcement officers traveled to a remote area near a road about 45 miles from Kay's home. There, they discovered more skeletal remains, believed to be connected to the missing teacher. These findings offered the first concrete physical evidence since Kay had vanished months earlier. Forensic experts confirmed the identity of the remains through dental records, putting an end to any uncertainty about who they belonged to. Despite this breakthrough, the cause of Kay's demise remained a mystery. The condition of the remains made it impossible for the investigators to determine how she had lost her life or what circumstances had led to her tragic fate. The discovery of Kay's remains did not lead to any arrests, and the case eventually went cold. In 1988, a certificate was officially issued for Kay. This legal step acknowledged her demise, despite the fact that she was still legally classified as a missing person. Finally, in 2025, the skull found in 1993 was identified. Authorities from the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office acknowledged the baffling nature of the case. They expressed uncertainty about how the majority of Kay's remains ended up 45 miles from her home, while her skull was found nearly 100 miles away on the coast. Nicholas, Kay's husband, passed away in 2018. Throughout the investigation, the police have stated that they do not consider him a suspect in her demise. The police have appealed to the public for any information that could shed light on Kay's disappearance and demise. They hope that someone, somewhere, might hold a crucial piece of information that can finally help solve the case. In the fall of 1997, skeletal remains were found near 43rd Street and 7th Avenue in Tampa, Florida. For more than 28 years, the identity of the man remained a mystery. Alongside the remains, the investigators found a valid resident alien card and social security card, offering a glimmer of hope in identifying the individual. However, that hope quickly faded as attempts to trace relatives or verify the documents hit an end. The cause of demise remained unknown, and with no clear direction, the investigation stalled. Even the involvement of the Mexican consulate in November 1997 yielded no helpful information. At the time, the authorities struggled to determine whether the man's demise had been natural, accidental, if he ended his own life, or if it is the result of foul play. For more than 28 years, the skeletal remains remained nameless. Despite periodic reviews, no new evidence surfaced. But recent advancements in forensic science have sparked renewed interest in forgotten cases like this one. The Hillsborough County Medical Examiner's Office, once limited by the technology of the 1990s, has embraced the growing field of DNA analysis and forensic genealogy. In early 2024, the Hillsborough County Medical Examiner's Office took a decisive step forward by reopening the decades-old case. This renewed effort came through a collaborative initiative with U.S. Customs and Border Protection's Missing Migrants Program and the Mexican Consulate. Rather than relying on forensic genealogy, the investigators employed routine DNA testing to pursue any potential familial connections. Their efforts paid off when they located a woman in Guanajuato, Mexico, who turned out to be the sister of the unidentified man. A cheek swab collected from her in August 2024 provided a long-awaited DNA match to the skeletal remains discovered in Tampa nearly 30 years earlier. In May 2025, with that DNA match, the authorities were able to confirm the identity of the deceased as Rodolfo Barcenas Guerrero. This breakthrough ended years of uncertainty, finally putting a name to the man whose remains had languished in anonymity since 1997. The Mexican consulate quickly stepped in to facilitate the next steps, working to ensure that Rodolfo's cremated remains would be returned to his family. Despite confirming his identity, the precise circumstances of his demise remain unsolved. The cause and manner of demise, originally deemed undetermined in 1997, still elude investigators today. Whether Rodolfo lost his life as a result of natural causes and accident, or under more suspicious circumstances, is something that remains a mystery. In December 1983, a person stepped into a quiet farmhouse in Walker, Iowa, only to find a horrifying scene. Despite an immediate investigation, the trail went cold for decades. Ronald Lee Novak was born on November 11, 1959, to Robert and Marguerite Novak in the southwest part of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The youngest of 7 siblings, Ronald grew up surrounded by a large family in a working-class environment. He attended Jefferson High School and graduated in 1978. As the years passed, Ronald remained close to his roots. By the early 1980s, he had settled in a rural area near the small town of Walker, just outside Center Point, Iowa. There, he found work in construction and mechanical repair, relying on his hands and practical skills to make a living. The peaceful countryside offered him the solitude he appreciated, and he led a relatively low-profile life. Despite his preference for privacy, Ronald maintained close ties with his family and a tight circle of friends. By December 23, 1983, Ronald was anticipating the holidays. It was the eve of Christmas Eve, and he looked forward to celebrating with his loved ones. At 24 years old, he had plans to spend time with his family and his girlfriend. His girlfriend and his best friend, Dale Laver, were expected to visit him later that evening. On the morning of December 24th, life came to a shocking and violent end. A friend arrived at Ronald's home, only to discover a gruesome scene. Ronald was found deceased in an unheated room of the house, the victim of what appeared to be a robbery or burglary gone horribly wrong. His hands were bound behind his back, and his body showed signs of brutal trauma. He had been beaten repeatedly with 2 hammers and a golf club. Both weapons were still lying near his body. and he had been shot once in the upper right arm with a .22 caliber handgun. The brutality of the crime was jarring, but perhaps even more heartbreaking was the sight of Ronald's 3 loyal dogs. They huddled around his lifeless body in the frigid room, visibly shivering as they tried to offer him warmth, refusing to leave his side. The friend, shaken by what he saw, wasted no time and quickly alerted the local authorities. When the police officers arrived at the scene, they immediately recognized the magnitude of the violence that had taken place. An investigation was promptly launched. As the detectives surveyed the scene, they noted the signs of a fierce struggle. Blood was splattered throughout the room, indicating that Ronald had fought back. Nearby, his cordless telephone lay discarded near the golf club and hammers, as if he had attempted to call for help but was overpowered. His wallet was missing, a detail that pointed to theft as a motive. According to Ronald's brother Don Novak, Ronald typically carried several $100s in cash, money that was gone. The police also noticed a broken window in the kitchen door, suggesting that at least one of the attackers had tried to force entry there. Interestingly, that door remained locked and Ronald's loaded shotgun, usually kept near the entrance, had not been used. This detail raised further questions about how the intruders had gained access and why Ronald, who was usually cautious, had not reached for his weapon. The investigators would later uncover even more troubling elements inside the home. In Ronald's bedroom, officers found a small suitcase containing $32,000 in cash and, nearby, a green duffel bag with $7,650 worth of marijuana. These discoveries introduced new dimensions to the case, suggesting possible motives beyond simple robbery. Still, with strong winds sweeping across the property, any trace evidence, especially footprints left by the perpetrators, was quickly erased. No fingerprints were recovered, and local neighbors reported they had neither seen nor heard anything unusual that night. The autopsy report confirmed the savagery of the attack. Ronald had lost his life from a combination of blunt force trauma, a gunshot wound, and exposure to the freezing temperatures. In the days that followed, the detectives questioned Ronald's known acquaintances and compiled a list of what they described as good suspects. Yet, despite the number of people interviewed and leads followed, law enforcement lacked the physical evidence necessary to make an arrest. The case would soon grow cold. Decades later, renewed efforts by the investigators led to significant progress in Ronald Novak's long unsolved case. Technological advances in DNA analysis allowed the authorities to re-examine key evidence collected at the crime scene in 1983. Specifically, preserved blood samples and one of the hammers used in the attack were submitted for modern forensic testing. By May 2025, a DNA match was made to 64-year-old Michael Shapert of Fairview, Oregon. The identification of Shapert was made possible through a combination of conventional laboratory testing and genealogical DNA techniques. Blood and touch trace DNA were discovered on Ronald's clothing, and one of the hammers believed to have been used in the fatal beating. These materials had been carefully preserved for more than 4 decades. DNA Labs International conducted the initial forensic testing, while Parabon Nanolabs provided genetic genealogy information that ultimately led the investigators to Shapard as a key suspect in the case. According to the investigators, evidence indicates that Shapard was not acting alone. The investigation suggests that Shapard, along with other unidentified individuals, likely went to Ronald's rural home with the intent to rob him of cash and marijuana. The large amount of money and substances found at the scene in 1983 supports this theory. What was intended as a robbery quickly escalated into a brutal and fatal attack, leaving Ronald bound, beaten, shot, and left to pass away in freezing conditions. In May 2025, Shapert was arrested in Oregon by a joint effort of federal and local law enforcement. He was formally charged in the first degree and is pending extradition to Lynn County, Iowa. He remains incarcerated at the Multnomah County Detention Center in Portland while the authorities prepare for his transfer. For Ronald's surviving family members, the news of an arrest has stirred both relief and grief. His sisters, who have endured decades without answers, expressed their deep emotional response to the development. One of them said the following, reflecting on the long years of uncertainty and pain, "It takes strength to endure such hardship." While Shapert awaits trial, the investigators continue to pursue leads related to the other individuals believed to have been involved. For Ronald's family, the hope is that full accountability will follow and that the silence surrounding his demise will finally be broken. In March 1981, a 20-year-old woman vanished in the Las Vegas area. The case would take decades to be solved. Vicky Radig was born in 1961 and spent her childhood in Boulder City, Nevada, not far from the bright lights of Las Vegas. Vicky attended Boulder City High School, where she built lasting connections and quietly moved through her school years with grace. She graduated in 1977. By early 1981, Vicky was 20 years old and had settled into life in the Las Vegas area. She found local employment. At this point in her life, Vicky was in a relationship with Walter Bradley DeMint. Details about the dynamics of their relationship remain limited, but it is clear that they spent time together and were romantically involved. In March 1981, Vicky was reported missing by her family. Concern quickly mounted when it became clear that Vicky had not returned home after going out with her boyfriend, Walter. Her family informed the police that she had last been seen with Walter, prompting the investigators to focus their early efforts on tracing her movements that day. The authorities invited him in for questioning shortly after the report was filed. During the interview, he claimed that the two had gotten into an argument and that Vicky had run off afterward. This explanation immediately raised concerns, but with no immediate evidence to contradict his story, the police had to proceed cautiously. Just 2 days after she was reported missing, Vicky's body was discovered in a remote desert area along Boulder Highway. The grim discovery confirmed her family's worst fears. The police quickly ruled that her life was ended after determining that she had suffered both blunt and sharp force trauma. Walter was named a person of interest early in the investigation. His story raised red flags with the detectives, particularly due to several inconsistencies in his account of the events leading up to Vicky's disappearance. Despite this, the investigators struggled to find physical evidence or witness testimony strong enough to formally charge him. The Henderson Police Department continued to investigate, but revealed little about the direction of their inquiries. They did not confirm whether any other suspects had been identified or seriously considered during the course of the case. With limited leads and no new breakthroughs, momentum slowly faded. Eventually, the case went cold. In 2021, for decades after the initial investigation into Vicky's case, new developments began to emerge. DNA swabs taken from her during the original autopsy were re-examined using modern forensic techniques. The testing revealed a match. Walter Bradley DeMint had contributed DNA found on the samples. This discovery marked a pivotal breakthrough in the long-dormant case. The momentum continued into 2022 and 2023 as the investigators submitted additional evidence from the original case for further forensic analysis. This second round of testing reinforced the initial findings, uncovering more DNA linked to both DeMint and Vicky. With these results, the investigators were able to strengthen the narrative that had long pointed to DeMint, but until then lacked the physical proof to support prosecution. Armed with this new evidence, the Henderson Police Department presented their findings to the Clark County District Attorney's Office. In April 2025, after reviewing the forensic results and the history of the investigation, the DA's office agreed with the police conclusions. DeMint was the only viable suspect ever identified in the case. The previously inconclusive suspicions had finally been backed by definitive scientific evidence. However, a crucial detail changed the course of what could have been a renewed legal process. The investigators learned that DeMint had passed away in 2007. His demise effectively closed the door on any possibility of prosecution. Despite this, law enforcement did not view the case as without purpose. The Henderson Police Department notified Vicky's family members of the recent findings. Barbara Follett. The 1930s was a monumental decade in world history. In 1930, the first ever FIFA World Cup took place, Pluto was discovered and named, and future astronaut Buzz Aldrin was born. In the years that followed, the Hindenburg disaster shocked the world, famed aviator Amelia Earhart vanished, and ultimately World War II began. Over time, many of the most intriguing mysteries of the 1930s have faded into obscurity. One such mystery is Barbara Follett. Born on March 4, 1914, in Hanover, New Hampshire, Barbara Newhall Follett appeared destined for greatness. Her father, Wilson, was a literary editor, critic, and university lecturer, while her mother, Helen, was a children's author. It was no surprise to her parents when Barbara's creativity and talent for writing emerged during her homeschooling sessions. The little girl excelled in writing and reading activities, and by the age of 4, she'd begun to write her own poetry. Barbara's writing often dealt with the themes of nature and the wilderness. Her first novel, The House Without Windows, revolved around a young girl who ran away from home to live in nature with the animals. The book was published in 1927 when Barbara was just 12 years old, and it was praised up and down the nation. Her second book was published when she was just 14 and once again was critically acclaimed. However, despite her promising career, vivid imagination, and endless talent, Barbara was living under a cloud. In the lead-up to her parents' separation in 1928, her father had begun to spend more and more time in New York, where he'd met and fallen for a woman 20 years his junior. The separation of her parents devastated Barbara, who was very close to her father. Reportedly, he was the biggest supporter of her creative endeavors, and he essentially abandoned her following the divorce. Not willing to quit just yet, however, Barbara encouraged her mother to start anew. Helen placed her other daughter Sabra into the care of a family member before she and Barbara headed off to start a new adventure, sailing from New York to Barbados and exploring the Caribbean islands. While traveling to Washington in 1929, Barbara met 25-year-old Edward Anderson. He became her closest companion, and Barbara ultimately fell in love with him. But the relationship Barbara Wanta never took off, and she returned to the U.S. with her mother. From here, she enrolled in university but quickly decided it wasn't for her and ran away to San Francisco. By all accounts, Barbara appears to have led a turbulent life as a teenager and young adult. By the age of 16, she was working as a secretary in New York City. She continued to write manuscripts but had fallen out of favor with publishers, meaning her newer work never saw the light of day. In July of 1934, she married Nickerson Rogers. The pair had met in the summer of 1931 while traveling across Europe. At last, the young woman seemed fulfilled and happy. But this euphoria did not last long. Just a few years later, in 1937, Barbara began to express her dissatisfaction with the marriage. In 1938, she began to suspect Rogers of having an affair and became increasingly distressed by the notion. On December 7, 1939, Barbara, now 25, left the home she shared with her husband in Massachusetts and was never seen or heard from again. According to Rogers, he and his wife argued and she left. She never came back and took with her $30, the modern-day equivalent of about $558, and a single note. All of her documents, manuscripts, and other personal possessions were left behind. However, Rogers did not report her missing until 2 weeks later, claiming that he was waiting for her to return. It is possible that the couple had argued because Rogers had asked Barbara for a divorce, but we don't know this for certain. For months later, Rogers asked the authorities to issue a missing person bulletin, but it was done under her married name, so the media did not pick up the case. Rogers also reportedly declined to publicize the case further, but this could have been due to Barbara's bad track record with the media. News outlets didn't actually pick up on her story until 1966. In 1941, Rogers reportedly attempted to divorce Barbara on the grounds of cruelty, but this was unsuccessful. However, he did eventually manage to get a divorce in 1944 and remarried shortly after. According to one of his daughters, Rogers hired a private investigator to help locate Barbara, but the investigator found no signs of the missing 25-year-old. In 1952, Barbara's mother Helen pushed for more to be done in her daughter's case. She suspected Rogers of being involved and even wrote him a letter that said, "All of this silence on your part looks as if you had something to hide concerning Barbara's disappearance." She told him that she would do everything in her power to find out whether Barbara was dead or alive and where she was. Authorities never found a trace of Barbara after her disappearance. It has been theorized that she left to start a new life somewhere else. After all, she seemed to be an independent woman who loved adventure. It has also been speculated that she left to take her own life given her history of depression. One Reddit user pointedly noted that Barbara may have seen her husband's distant cool behavior as an echo of her father's abandonment, which may have caused her great emotional distress. It's also been pointed out that her first love, Edward, passed away in 1937, and this may have added to the heartache. On November 25, 1948, a hunter found human remains in Mount Prospect Woods, which overlooks Guam Lake in New Hampshire. Barbara was fond of the area and had stayed in a nearby farmhouse with Rogers several times. The remains were skeletal and some parts were missing, likely due to the weather and scavenging animals. But authorities were able to determine that they belonged to a woman in her mid-20s and that the skeleton had been there since at least 1939. For their parts, law enforcement determined that the remains were those of a 25-year-old pregnant woman named Elsie Whitmore who'd gone missing from Plymouth in 1936. However, there has been some speculation that the remains actually belonged to Barbara due to the discrepancies between the skeleton and Elsie. The oddities are as follows. 1. Glasses were recovered from the scene, but Elsie did not wear glasses. 2. A size 7 shoe was found along with the body, but Elsie wore a 5 or a 5.5. 3. No belongings from the scene could be identified by Elsie's family. It's also been noted that the Plymouth girl was in the later stages of pregnancy at the time of her vanishing, yet there was no indication in these remains that the body was of someone who was pregnant. And 4. A water flask and a medicine bottle containing traces of barbiturates were found at the scene. As a result, investigators believe that Jane Doe had taken her own life. And wouldn't you know, Barbara was known to have been prescribed barbiturates for her disordered sleeping pattern. No death certificate for Elsie was ever released, and her family never received the bones for burial. In fact, her family never really accepted the remains were hers. There is also no indication as to where the bones were buried or where they went. Their location to this day is unknown. Investigators closed their investigation roughly 1 week after the remains were found, satisfied with their conclusion that the body belonged to Elsie. There is considerable debate online about whether the bones could belong to the 25-year-old Barbara. However, without access to the remains, her descendants cannot perform DNA testing to verify or refute this theory. No trace of Barbara has ever surfaced since her abrupt disappearance, and no evidence has emerged to confirm or rule out foul play. To this day, her vanishing remains an unsolved and perplexing mystery. Moving on to the next case. Angel Ormston. In the summer of 1992, Angel Ormston was a 17-year-old high school student living in the quiet, middle-class suburb of Mentor in Lake County, Ohio. Known for her radiant smile and golden blonde hair, Angel was friendly, approachable, and loved spending time with her friends. Her social nature often led her to hang out with friends and drive around town, enjoying music and the freedom that came with it. Like many teenagers her age, Angel was navigating the journey of growing up in a small town, but her life was tragically cut short, leaving her family and friends to cope with the deep loss. Angel had the freedom to go wherever she pleased, thanks to her own car. The Great Lakes Mall, a popular spot in the community, was one of her favorite places to hang out, and she also worked part-time at a burger restaurant there. On the afternoon of July 31st, 1992, Angel told her mother that she was heading to the mall to pick up her paycheck and run a few errands. However, by the next morning, Angel hadn't returned home. Since it wasn't unusual for her to spend the night at a friend's house, her mother initially thought she was there, and no one was immediately concerned. But as the hours passed, her family began to worry when Angel never showed up, setting off a chain of events that would change their lives forever. Angel didn't really have rules when it came to checking in with her mother, Jackie, because she wasn't a particularly strict person. Since Angel's mother was aware of her high level of independence, she didn't worry as much as some other parents would have. Angel never had a lot of rules guiding her life because her father, a long-haul truck driver, was also frequently gone from the house. 2 days later, when Angel's older brother went to the mall to do a little shopping, he spotted something that concerned him. In the parking lot of the Great Lakes Mall was the 1981 white-color Honda Civic owned by Angel. He approached Angel's vehicle and peered inside to find her pocketbook and hairbrush lying on the seat. He immediately called their mother, who responded to his call and came to pick up Angel's car. Jackie, their mother, was however still of the opinion that Angel was with Stacy, her best friend. Stacy's residence was the first one she tried to call, but no one picked up. At this point, Angel's mother started to worry and ultimately made the decision to call the police to report her daughter missing. It was now August 2nd, 1992. Angel had last been seen on July 31st. When questioned by the police about why she had delayed so long before reporting her daughter missing, Jackie explained that she believed she had to wait 48 hours before making a report. Jackie once more resorted to Stacy, who was Angel's closest friend and the person most likely to know where Angel was. Stacy and Angel spoke on the phone when they were separated despite spending practically every day together. But on this particular weekend, Stacy had been baking cookies at her sister's place, so she was shocked when Jackie eventually called her. She hasn't seen Angel all weekend and has no idea where she could be. Jackie, who had assumed that her daughter had been with Stacy since she departed on Friday afternoon, was horrified to learn of this. The Mentor police undertake a thorough search right away, and Larry Fish is named the case's lead detective. He began by thoroughly searching Angel's vehicle, but no indication of foul play was discovered. Additionally, nothing appeared to have been stolen. Instead, it appeared as though Angel had stood up and walked away from her car by herself. However, no one who knew Angel well could comprehend why she would want to pack up and leave town. She was highly loved, outgoing, and popular. She also planned to attend college in the future. Investigators started to look into the idea that Angel may have been taken because there were no indications of a fight. Numerous fingerprints were found on her car when it was dusted for them, but they could all be linked to Angel's friends and relatives. Inadvertently, this made them all suspect. First, Detective Fisher contacted her father's trucking company, but dispatch records indicate that he was out of the state at the time of Angel's disappearance. He then demanded that Jackie undergo a polygraph test, but to the amazement of the detectives, Jackie declined to do so. Jackie and her strange behavior came under closer scrutiny by the detectives. They questioned her about a number of things, including why she took so long to report her daughter missing and if she thought Angel had been the victim of foul play. Why then did she move Angel's car, potentially disrupting any evidence? However, the police lacked concrete evidence against Jackie and were unable to legally compel her to take the polygraph test. The burger business where Angel worked was the last location she claimed to have been to, so the police began to investigate there. When the police arrived, the burger restaurant, Angel's co-workers claimed that she never showed up there that day and that her paycheck was still available. However, when Angel's co-workers revealed to the investigators that they already knew what might have happened to Angel, the investigators became alarmed. They told the detectives about a peculiar male manager they had who enjoyed preying on the young female employees and would frequently linger nearby while they changed into their work uniforms. This manager had been fired for sexual harassment, including instances where he had touched several of the employees in an inappropriate manner. After investigators looked into his background, they discovered that the individual has a history of having contact with minor girls. The employees continued by saying that the manager had a thing for Angel in particular and would frequently pay her additional attention, keep an eye on her while she worked, and make lewd remarks about her. They added that he had found every opportunity in the little kitchen to converse with and approach Angel. Due to this recently discovered information, the manager was elevated to the top of the list of suspects. He was promptly located by the police, but he flatly denied any involvement in Angel's disappearance. He claimed he hadn't seen Angel since the two of them had worked together, and that day he had been far from the Great Lakes Mall. He actually had the timesheets to show that he had been employed at another fast food restaurant at the time. The suspicion that the burger restaurant was somehow connected to Angel's disappearance persisted in the minds of the investigators. They questioned the manager and staff members once more and learned a secret that Angel had been hiding from her family. When Angel told her mother she was going to pick up her paycheck, she never mentioned that it would be her last. It appeared that Angel had been fired from her job for consistently being late. Everyone associated with her place of work was eventually cleared. The police was once more back to the very beginning. Angel's friends and family couldn't figure out why anyone would want to hurt her. She was a kind and trustworthy girl who didn't tend to have enemies. Investigators had a tendency to think that her trusting character may have allowed someone to take advantage of her, and that she may have left with someone who intended to harm her. Stacy, Angel's best friend, was the last person to see the victim alive in this instance. The last person to see a victim alive is typically the one who has done something sinister. The investigators once again decided that Stacy was definitely a person of interest. Police made the decision to speak with Stacy. They had a 4-hour conversation. Stacy was eager to share all the information she knows with the detectives, but her alibi remained the same. She spent the entire weekend baking at her sister's house. She did provide one potential lead for the detectives, though. She named a student at their school whom she advised the detectives to look into. The student was Mark Saka. According to Stacy, 19-year-old Mark Saka had just received his honors diploma from their school. Mentor Hai and Angel had a strong admiration for Mark and yearned to be in a relationship with him. Angel's relationship with Mark over the summer was a secret only to her closest friends. The largest secret was revealed by Stacy afterwards. Angel was pregnant with Mark's child. Stacy said that Angel had wanted to tell Mark she was pregnant before she vanished. She had hoped that he would embrace her and want to start a relationship with her and raise the child. However, Mark was scheduled to enroll at Akron University and was alleged to have just been leading Angel on throughout the summer. He didn't seem to be interested in a long-term relationship with Angel. On hearing this, Mark Saka was rounded up by the police right away to be questioned. Mark was shocked to learn that he was being investigated over the case and insisted that he and Angel were not even dating, let alone that she could be pregnant with his child. He claimed that although they had only ever had one sexual encounter, it had been a long time ago. Then he said he had a girlfriend and had been dating her for 2 years. According to him, he worked until 5 o'clock that Friday and then went to the mall to buy a present for his girlfriend. Later, he then had pizza with friends. Police started investigating his alibi and began by looking into his workplace. They proceeded to Mark's place of employment, and his time card did show that he was speaking the truth about his attendance at work. When they took Mark's shopping route to the stores, they discovered that he could have made the trip in the time he claimed. The friends Mark claimed he linked up with that night were finally approached. They verified they had met for pizza and a movie at 9 o'clock. But Mark was unable to present any witnesses for the shopping outing. Nobody recognized Mark when investigators questioned staff members from the stores he claimed to have gone to. This made the investigators question Mark's account of this time period. Due to this gap in his evening, the detectives asked Mark to take a polygraph examination. He agreed and did really well on the test, proving that he wasn't giving false information in his responses. Mark was no longer considered a suspect as a result of his cooperation and the polygraph test. The police then reverted to the original assumption that Angel either fled town or was kidnapped from her car by a different offender. They suspected Angel may have fled to have her pregnancy alone since she knew her mother would not approve of an abortion. Once more, there were no leads for the police to pursue until a few weeks later when a prisoner at the Lake County Detention Center provided a tip. According to him, in Cleveland, there was a prostitute named Angel who fit Angel Ormiston's description of a blonde between the ages of 17 to 20 with a lovely smile and who was found wandering the streets alone. The description was a perfect fit for Angel. The prisoner claimed to have seen Angel moments before his arrest. He continued by saying that a man by the name of Pimp Gaddy had employed Angel. When Detective Fisher contacted his Cleveland colleagues, they confirmed that the police in Cleveland were aware of someone going by the name of Pimp Daddy. He operated his business out of a 2-story building on the outskirts of the city. Runaways, strays, and troublesome views made up his workforce, but they had been told not to speak to authorities or divulge their names. Police could only attempt to save Angel once. They made the decision to raid the location, specifically during their busiest hours, which was a Friday evening. Police were able to locate the said girl after a search warrant was approved. While she acknowledged that her name was Angel, she remained silent. The only way to determine if this was the missing mentor, Ohio resident Angel Ormiston, was to call her mother Jackie and urge her to travel to Cleveland to meet the young woman and maybe identify her as her daughter. Jackie prepared herself for the worst, but it was discovered that the girl was not Angel Ormston when she got there. Nevertheless, this act did result in some good when the little girl's family was found and she was sent home, rescuing her from a life of crime, drugs, and prostitution. In an effort to get Angel's name and story in the media, Jackie, who was inconsolable, invited every local news station into her home. She pleaded for information and begged for assistance in finding her daughter a number of times. Flyers that Angel's friends created were dispersed across the neighborhood. In order to gather a sum of $10,000 for Angel's safe return, the community turns to local businesses, organizations, and charity for donations. Within a month, the Mentor Police Department received thousands of tips. Police spent a lot of time investigating the tips, but to no avail. Because Jackie believed the police weren't acting quickly enough, the Ormstons had to hire their own private investigator. But this did not provide any results either. After more than 3 months, was still missing. Despite the lack of progress in her situation, her mother remained optimistic. In case Angel ever called home, Jackie left a voice note for her on her answering machine. As the months passed, there was frustration among Angel's family and friends, and rage at the police station intensified. The search for Angel almost ended when a local man went hunting with his dog on December 15, 1992. The dog detected a scent during their walk and moved in the direction of a drainage ditch. The man then became aware of a sizable form that was covered in a sheet and had a rope tied around it. He noticed something that appeared to be a human hand when he pulled back the fabric. Despite being severely decomposed, the body had been lying face down for several months when it was discovered by investigators, which is roughly how long Angel has been missing. Green duct tape and an old piece of clothesline were used to bind the corpse. Police were able to identify the body as being that of a female despite the fact that it was completely unrecognizable. Everyone recognized the person in their hearts. In an effort to identify her killer, the forensic team collected her bones and started digging through the earth for any evidence that could help with the case. The coroner was able to identify Angel Ormston's remains on December 16th, thanks to dental records. The small town's residents were shocked when the news of Angel's murder traveled throughout the community. An autopsy revealed that Angel had suffered a traumatic head injury as well as 2 stab wounds to the chest. Those stab wounds were determined to be the cause of death by the coroner. She had been violently and angrily stabbed. At least the police had physical evidence by this point to try to identify the murderer. The forensic team was able to retrieve a blue piece of carpet fibers which was stuck to the duct tape. In their search for the matching blue carpet, police put together a list of all the houses associated with Angel, including her family and friends. One of those residences belonged to Mark Satka's parents. The boy Angel had been seen all summer. The house was empty at the time of Angel's murder since it was up for sale, but Mark had been spotted using it. There were only 2 persons with the keys at that time, Mark and his mother. When the police went over to the house to look at it, they discovered it had been sold, but they were permitted by the new owners to search the house. The owners have entirely renovated the house, with the exception of 2 rooms and the basement. Investigators observed blue carpet squares on the steps as they descended into the basement. They then took some samples to compare with the blue carpet fibers discovered on Angel's remains. They also observed that a part of the laundry room clothing line had been removed. This was also hurriedly processed in the lab, and the findings support their suspicions. There was a match. The carpets, stairs, and walls of the basement all had small blood stains, and a bloody thumbprint was also obtained for testing. The police soon arrested Mark Saka for Angel's murder the day after they found his basement of horrors. His arrest came 5 months after Angel Ormston vanished. Mark was still acting defiantly and was attempting to persuade the police that they lacked sufficient proof to prosecute him. Investigators were, however, looking at his car at the same time. Even though Mark had made an effort to thoroughly wash his car, the job fell short. The exact roll of green duct tape that was used to bind Angel was still in his car, along with remnants of blood in the trunk. After being challenged by Detective Fisher with all of these tangible evidence against him, Mark finally acknowledged doing something stupid. When asked what stupid thing he did, he said that he killed Angel. He claimed that he brought Angel to the house with the purpose of having intercourse with her, but that he became angry when she revealed that she was pregnant and that he was the father. When Angel refused to get the abortion he insisted she have, he got angry and knocked her to the ground by his repeated punches. He hurried up the stairs and raced to the garage to retrieve a knife and stabbed her twice. Detectives questioned if Angel was alive or dead before he stabbed her. He responded that she was alive since he could see her breathing. Mark then dragged her up the stairs after wrapping her body and tying a laundry line around her legs. She was placed in his car and he drove to the woods to discard her body there. He went back home to clean up before going to dinner with his friends. The entire time that Mark had been eating pepperoni pizza and having fun with his friends, Angel's body had been lying in a shallow grave. After Mark's interview and confessions, he was accused of killing Angel. The news brought some relief to Angel's loved ones as authorities finally made progress in the case. Mark led investigators to the roadside spot where he had discarded Angel's car keys and then guided them to a remote location where he had thrown away the knife used in the crime, though the weapon was never recovered. Mark's motive for killing Angel was rooted in his belief that she was a hindrance to his life. He saw her as a complication, especially since she was pregnant with his child. Despite not having any genuine feelings for Angel, Mark felt he would be burdened with responsibility for her and their unborn child, which he clearly resented. In February 1993, Mark pleaded guilty to aggravated murder and kidnapping in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. During the investigation, he had passed a polygraph test, which was a reflection of his lack of conscience. Throughout the process, Mark showed no remorse for his actions, further illustrating his indifference to the crime he had committed. Moving on to the next case. Blanca Mabel Otero Alvarez. Blanca Mabel Otero Alvarez was born in 1952 in Cuchalite, El Chaco province, Argentina. When she was 21, her family moved to her parents' hometown of Chilaches in Spain. Although Blanca had been a schoolteacher in Argentina, she struggled to find work in Spain. Eventually, she secured a job with the National Rail Board. To be closer to her job, Blanca moved to Leon City, but she continued to visit her parents every week. Then one day she disappeared. She did not take anything with her. At first, her family did not report her missing because her father did not want them to. Finally, in 1997, they did report Blanca missing. By then, she would have been 45 years old. Within a few days of reporting her missing, the police found Blanca in the city of Guyenne. She told the police, however, that she did not want to get in contact with her family. Her family was disappointed but determined to reunite with her. They made their way to Guyenne, but learned that Blanca realized that they were on their way and gave up her apartment and moved on. In 2005, Blanca wrote a letter to her family that included a photograph of her. In the letter, she asked for forgiveness from her dad and said that she would make contact with her family more, but she never did. Little did her family know that Blanca changed her name to Ava and moved to La Fresneda estate. She was working, caring for children and pets, and cleaning houses. Her neighbors knew her for years without knowing she was a missing person. In August 2020, the local police received calls from residents in La Fresneda. They were concerned because they hadn't seen their neighbor, Ava, for a few days. The police had to force the windows open to get into her house. Inside, they found 68-year-old Avis sitting on the floor in her lounge. She was dehydrated and apparently absent mentally, not speaking, confused, and seemingly unaware of what was going on around her. She was taken to the Astoria Central University Hospital. Efforts were made to trace her next of kin, and it was eventually discovered that Eva was not listed on the local records. Finally, she was identified as the missing Blanca Otero Alvarez. Her family was contacted, and they were stunned to learn that Blanca had been found and was alive. Blanca's mother, now 90 years old, still needs to be informed that her daughter has been located. Lam Yohe, better known as Elisa Lam to her peers at the University of British Columbia and the broader public, was a bright, thoughtful, and creative student. Her interests in fashion and talent for writing were overshadowed by the struggles of bipolar disorder and mental health challenges. which many believe played a role in her disappearance and tragic death. For almost 9 years, both amateur sleuths and professional investigators have searched tirelessly, scrutinizing every detail in hopes of uncovering the truth behind Elisa Lam's demise. Despite their efforts and the available evidence, these investigations have only raised more questions than answers, leaving the mystery unresolved and open to anyone willing to take on the challenge. As a hope to provide a more substantial reasoning built upon observable evidence and situational analysis, this is an examination of the bizarre circumstances surrounding Elisa Lam's confusing death. Elisa Lam was born on April 30th, 1991 in Vancouver, British Columbia to 2 immigrants from Hong Kong, David and Yenna Lam. Her parents opened up a restaurant in Burnaby, Canada, and the family helped operate the popular dining spots called Paul's Restaurant for years. In 2010, Elisa started her first blog on the internet titled E.T. Fields. Throughout the next couple of years, she used the platform to showcase her love of fashion and clothing, often posting magazine articles and fashion-related photography. Elisa Lam often spoke candidly about her struggles with mental illness, expressing concern that her academic transcript, marked by dropped classes and irregular attendance, might reflect poorly on her. Despite these challenges, she wrote deeply and thoughtfully about psychology, emotions, and the human spirit. Her blog served as a canvas for her introspection, showcasing a bright mind and a reflective thinker. In her final post on her blog, Etherfields, Elisa announced a shift in her online presence to Tumblr, launching a page she titled Nouvelle Nouvelle, meaning News New. On this platform, Elisa shared thousands of posts, including her own writings and curated works from other authors, alongside an array of evocative images. It was apparent on Tumblr that she held deep-rooted interests in classical books and films, experimental art and design and fashion and culture. Sprinkled amongst these fascinations were bits of dark and brooding images, hinting at a more personal sadness and perhaps conflicted mind full of monsters, melancholy, and misery. In fact, Elisa did have a history with a couple of psychological disorders. This narrative kept under wraps by her family for months after her disappearance and death. Specifically, she was diagnosed for bipolar disorder and depression. Bipolar disorder is a mental health condition characterized by episodes of depression as well as periods of unusually elevated mood, known as mania or hypomania. Elisa Lam managed her condition with medications like Dexedrine, Wellbutrin, and mood stabilizers. For much of her life, she coped with her struggles effectively, showing no significant signs of instability or risk to herself or others. Up until her ill-fated trip to Los Angeles in 2013, Elisa displayed resilience and functionality despite her challenges. It's essential to remember Elisa Lam as more than her diagnosis, a complex, thoughtful, and creative individual who lived with courage and humanity. She was a promising student at the University of British Columbia and obviously had a plethora of ideas about the world. She had a family, hobbies, and most importantly, a future. Unfortunately, it was cut short of its potential as the mystery of her fate began to unravel in December of 2012. Now let's explore the timeline of events leading to Elisa's death. On December 21, 2012, Elisa gives the first recorded mention of her desire to travel to the West Coast and visit a school in Santa Clara for potential transfer. On December 28, 2012, Elisa Lam mentioned on her Tumblr that she had misplaced her cell phone. As the new year arrived, she shared plans for her upcoming West Coast tour on January 5, 2013, marking the first time she suggested meeting people she'd connected with online. A few days later, on January 7th, Elisa booked her flight for the trip and posted a cryptic and unsettling message about the future on Tumblr. On January 9th, she revealed that paranoia had driven her to create a new Facebook account, her fifth, and she reposted a blurb she had written earlier that day. These entries provide a glimpse into her state of mind leading up to her tragic journey. Before the blurb is an introduction in which she claims, "This is the very start of my depression, and today I am feeling very low." Fast forward to January 18th when Elisa supposedly arrives in Vancouver on her tour. For days later, on January 22nd, she supposedly traveled to San Diego for the next leg in her journey after missing her initial flight while getting lost in the airport. On January 24th, Elisa posts on Tumblr that her trip so far has consisted mostly of activities and actions that she participates in back at home on a normal schedule. With this post, she hints at her later actions in Los Angeles when she says, on January 27th, 2013, Elisa Lam posted on Tumblr about spending time with friends at a speakeasy. She mentioned losing another phone, though this one wasn't hers. It was a borrowed BlackBerry from a friend for her trip. The following day, January 28th, Elisa arrived in Los Angeles and checked into the Cecil Hotel, a budget-friendly accommodation near Skid Row known for its dark history. By January 30th, Elisa's roommates reported concerns about her odd behavior, prompting hotel staff to relocate her to a private room on the 5th floor to avoid disturbing other guests. On January 31st, the day she was scheduled to leave LA, Elisa was last seen by hotel staff and a bookstore clerk, Katie Orphan. Orphan described her as lively, outgoing, and friendly despite being alone. This would be the final confirmed sighting of Elisa Lam. Orphan also said she was talking about what books she was getting and whether or not what she was getting would be too heavy for her to carry around as she traveled. Because Elisa was supposed to check out of the Cecil Hotel that day and travel to Santa Cruz for the last leg on her tour, both her parents were waiting for a phone call. In fact, Elisa had called her parents almost every night during her trip despite losing her temporary cell phone. After they heard nothing from their daughter, Mr. and Mrs. Lam flew to Los Angeles to file a missing persons reports and assist the Los Angeles Police Department in their search. Throughout the first week of February, both the Lam couple and the LAPD scoured the Cecil and the surrounding areas for any trace of Elisa. Tracking dogs brought in to aid in the search for Elisa Lam were unable to pick up her scent, leaving investigators without leads during the critical early days. Her hotel room revealed no signs of struggle, disturbance, or any suspicious items, deepening the mystery surrounding her sudden disappearance. On February 6, 2013, the LAPD issued an official statement online about Elisa's case, providing her description and urging the public to report any sightings or information. The following day, February 7th, a press conference was held, but no substantial tips emerged. On February 14th, the LAPD released a chilling piece of evidence. An elevator surveillance video from February 1st. The footage showed Elisa entering the elevator, pressing several buttons, and behaving erratically, peering out into the hallway, gesturing strangely, and seemingly hiding from someone unseen. The bizarre clip quickly went viral, capturing the attention of amateur sleuths and media worldwide. The clip was unsettling to say the least, but gave investigators one more glimpse into Lam's final sighting and brought the case to worldwide attention. The missing person search would soon come to an end, however, when on February 19th, a Cecil Hotel worker responded to multiple guest complaints about funny-smelling water and low faucet pressure. The employee went up to the rooftop water system, peered into the open tank, and discovered Elisa Lam's naked body floating face up. LAPD was immediately notified, and the water tank soon became a crime scene. A couple of days thereafter, on February 21st, the Los Angeles coroner's office issued a label of Elisa Lam's death as accidental due to the consequence of drowning with bipolar disorder as a finding of other conditions contributing, but not related to the immediate cause of death. In June 2013, the Los Angeles coroner's office released the full autopsy and toxicology reports related to Elisa Lam's case. While the findings did not introduce any groundbreaking revelations, they confirmed that Elisa's body was discovered unclothed in the water tank, with her clothes, keys, and watch also retrieved from the tank, all covered in a sandy residue. Despite the official ruling that her death was accidental, the reports failed to quell public curiosity or skepticism. Over the years, the case has inspired an endless stream of theories, ranging from plausible scenarios to far-fetched conspiracies. These discussions, fueled by the enigmatic elevator footage and unanswered questions, have continued to overshadow the coroner's conclusions, ensuring Elisa Lam's story remains a haunting enigma. Many questioned the police investigation and even more saw possible holes in the final reports. Regardless, the timeline of Elisa Lam's death and its direct series of events blossomed into the most talked-about case of the 21st century. Without a doubt, The most controversial and scrutinized piece of the Elisa Lam case is the 4-minute CCTV footage that the LAPD pulled from one of the Cecil Hotel surveillance tapes situated in the upper corner of a main elevator carriage in the northern corridor. The video is a bit grainy and segments of it are hard to clearly make out. But one thing is for certain, Elisa Lam is the subject of the footage and is clearly reacting to something. The enigmatic elevator footage of Elisa Lam leaves an unsettling impression that's difficult to shake. While the exact reasons behind her actions will likely never be fully understood, the clip takes on an even stranger dimension when viewed through the lens of her apparent unease. Her cautious glances out of the elevator suggest she might have felt she was being followed. At times, it seems as though she could be speaking, perhaps to herself, adding another layer of ambiguity. The seemingly arbitrary pressing of buttons upon her entry, the empty hallways, and her indistinct gestures and movements create a puzzling scene. The video resists any straightforward interpretation, leaving viewers with more questions than answers, even after multiple viewings. There have also been some controversy surrounding the tape's origins. Some people across the internet claim the footage skips 1 minute of the timecode, but because of its low quality, it's not easy to point out. Others say the footage itself has been tampered with, purposefully pixelating Elisa's mouth at various points. But these reports have either been denied or flat out ignored by professionals. One thing is for sure, the elevator footage from February 1st, 2013 depicting the last known images of Elisa Lam have conjured both worthy concern and far-fetched conspiracies and remains the single most intriguing piece of evidence linked to the case. Since the day Elisa Lam went missing, the CCTV tapes were released and her body was discovered on the rooftop of the Cecil Hotel. Numerous theories have emerged worldwide, each attempting to unravel the perplexing mystery of Elisa Lam's death. Many of these speculations delve into the realm of conspiracy, veering away from grounded reasoning. Some suggest she was engaging in an elevator game to access alternate dimensions. Others propose she was influenced by supernatural entities, encountered paranormal phenomena, or even made contact with extraterrestrial beings. These ideas, while imaginative, lean heavily on hyperbole and coincidence rather than tangible evidence. They often serve to sensationalize Elisa's tragic end, transforming it into a narrative of science fiction or the occult, without offering any substantiated connection to the real-world facts of the case. For example, the location of the Cecil Hotel is in Skid Row of downtown Los Angeles. The area is infamous for its high crime rates and suspicious activity. Drug peddling and violent crime are common both outside and inside of the hotel, which has its own history of murder and suicide. In 1985, serial killer Richard Ramirez, dubbed as the Night Stalker, stayed in one of the 600 rooms of the Cecil in the midst of a killing spree that ended in the deaths of 13 women. Another homicide suspect, Jack Unterberger, stayed in the hotel in 1991. The Cecil Hotel, infamous for its dark history, was a frequent site for tragic events, including suicides in the 1950s and 1960s, when individuals leaped from its rooftop. It was also the setting of a chilling unsolved case, the brutal 1964 murder of Pigeon Goldie Osgood, a beloved former telephone operator found mutilated in her room. Despite the macabre history of the hotel, none of its past tragedies directly connect to Elisa Lam's death. A more grounded theory suggests she may have been followed during her stay in Los Angeles, pursued through the Cecil's hallways, and ultimately murdered, with her body placed in the water tank by an unknown assailant. At first glance, this explanation appeared plausible. If you go back to multiple Tumblr posts that Elisa made throughout the end of 2012 and beginning of 2013, she was conscious about her outspoken nature and feared that one day her mouth would get her into trouble. At various points, she wrote about unsettling anxieties. One post read, "I'm going out tonight. I really hope no creeper comes near me." At least twice, Elisa was convinced trouble was lurking around the corner at the fault of her tongue, saying, "I really need to be removed from society before my big mouth gets me in trouble and I get beaten up." Elisa Lam herself admitted in her writings, "My mouth is my downfall and it will get me in trouble. I already do so many stupid things. I have trouble knowing where boundaries are, and it seems I always make the biggest mistakes at the worst possible moments." She reflected on how her impulsive actions often led to unintended consequences. particularly when attempting to cut corners or act without thinking. Additionally, she acknowledged a tendency to spark arguments with strangers, which raises the possibility that she might have encountered a confrontation in the wrong place at the wrong time during that winter in Los Angeles. This context adds another layer of complexity to the case, especially when paired with her peculiar behavior observed in the infamous elevator footage. After she enters for the first time and presses the floor buttons, she waits a few moments before slowly approaching the elevator's door frame. She then quickly sticks her head out in the hallway and glances from side to side in a hurried manner, then pulling back into the elevator. She pins herself against the wall and then into the corner, acting as if she was avoiding the vision of someone from outside. She goes back to the door frame once more and again, cautiously sticks her head into the open. From here, she makes a series of random movements before pressing more buttons. When Elisa returns outside for the final time, she appears to be communicating either verbally or with hand gestures, but no one is seen in the footage. This part of her movements could suggest that she was attempting to hide from someone, though her erratic footwork and dazed demeanor in the latter half of the video complicate the idea that she was actively fleeing from danger. These observations, combined with her Tumblr posts, raise the possibility that someone else could have been involved in her death. However, despite these suspicions, there are several counterarguments that suggest her death was not a homicide. For example, the absence of bruises or signs of bodily harm on Elisa's body seems to rule out the possibility of an assault. This discrepancy leaves the cause of her death open to interpretation and continues to fuel ongoing debate. All of her belongings were accounted for besides the long-lost cell phone, ruling out robbery or attempted robbery. The eyewitness testimonies by hotel employees and the bookstore clerk claimed she was completely alone and showed no signs of struggle or distress regarding another person. Cameras captured no other suspects around the time of Elisa's recording, and her lack of relationships in a new territory helped rule out a planned or just stated murder, as she had very little friends back at home, let alone Los Angeles. In the end, there was zero evidence confirming these theories about murder or foul play. This leads to a contradiction in the findings of the Los Angeles coroner's office. While the medical examiners prefaced their final conclusions with a disclaimer about the limited evidence, particularly due to the lack of blood samples for testing, they simultaneously state that the police investigation ruled out foul play. However, they also claimed that a thorough review of the case and consultations did not suggest an intention for self-harm. This creates a catch-22. The evidence doesn't conclusively point to either homicide or suicide, leaving the cause of Elisa Lam's death ambiguous and fueling ongoing debates and suspicions. The manner of death is classified as accident. So if there was no harmful intention either by Lam herself or a second suspect, then how exactly did Elisa accidentally climb up a massive cylinder, discover it was a water tank, lift up an incredibly heavy lid and jump into the dark water? And if the lid was already opened, why did she choose to climb in as a response? Murder and suicide are polar opposite explanations that have both been deemed inapplicable. Believers that Elisa was killed by somebody else linger over the fact that the rooftop access was protected by alarms on the doors and the fact that her accessing the water tanks required agility and strength. This sets a foundation for the theory that Elisa Lam's death was the result of a manic episode induced by her bipolar disorder. The toxicology reports confirmed the presence of medications, specifically antidepressants, in her system, which suggests that her mental state on the day of her death was influenced by these substances. These factors, combined with her previous struggles with the disorder, could have led to erratic behavior, such as her actions in the elevator footage. The presence of the fire escapes and the easy accessibility to the rooftop, where the water tank was located, strengthens the theory that Elisa may have wandered up to the roof during a manic episode, unknowingly climbing into the water tank. Given her mental state, she may not have realized the danger or the impossibility of escaping from it once inside. The lid on the water tank being lighter and easier to open than originally assumed further supports this theory. In this context, Elisa's death could be viewed as a tragic accident, where her mental health struggles, combined with the environment of the Cecil Hotel, led to an unfortunate series of events that ultimately resulted in her drowning. One of these drugs was bupropion, known to sometimes cause mania and bipolar disorder. Another mood-stabilizing medicine had metabolites traced to her enzymes, but Elisa's antipsychotic medicine was not found in her system. So in review, Elisa had only taken one of her prescribed drugs the day she passed and had only taken the others recently, if not at all, in the days leading up to her death. The toxicology reports also confirms that Elisa had no alcohol in her system or other recreational drugs. This rules out the possibility that she had been under the influence of substances while on camera in the elevator, or that something such as marijuana, pills, or drunkenness inspired her to climb into the tank. Her liver wasn't tested for rohypnol, and the absence of urine suggests she excreted any potential drugs before reaching the tank. Considering her mental health history and the effects of her prescribed medications, it's important to understand mania. Episodes can involve psychotic symptoms like hallucinations, delusions, and paranoia. One mental health expert described mania as, symptoms of mania also include psychomotor agitation, which involves repetitive, purposeless, or unintentional movements and behaviors. Dr. Daniel Morell reviews in a medical journal that these actions can result in the wringing of the hands, pacing, and taking off clothes repeatedly. All three behaviors were exhibited by Elisa, both in the elevator footage and in or around the water tanks. The fact that Elisa Lam attempted to go to the roof at all could be a response to hallucinations or delusions. What these might have been are unknown, and it would be unfair to Elisa's memory to assume and fictionalize her mental illness. It's crucial to recognize that manic hallucinations can involve all the senses, not just sight, which might explain why Elisa removed her clothing. The combination of irregular medication use, being in a foreign place, and lack of communication with home could have triggered her manic episode. Guests she stayed with reported her odd behavior, which led to her being moved to a private room. The final piece of evidence supporting this theory comes from a confidential source, referred to as Resident A, who wishes to remain anonymous, but their testimony offers further insight into Elisa's state leading up to her disappearance. After hearing about our investigation to the case of Elisa Lam and having little to no prior knowledge of this scenario, Resident A told us that a few years ago, they had a family member in Mexico commit suicide as a result of manic depression or bipolar disorder. Resident A stated that this family member died from drowning after plunging into the depths of a similar industrial water tank. Resident A also stated that this was a common occurrence for the family member who was a result of their bipolar disorder. Seeked out bodies of water whenever suffering from bouts of mania. Resident A confirmed that this family member was about 35 years old when they passed away, but had been suffering from mental illness for over a decade and had an inclination to run away and find attraction to water throughout the years. While this case has no direct relation to Elisa Lam, it's peculiar that both instances involve a confirmed bipolar subject who, as a result of their condition, drowned because of an unconscious gravitation to water. While there is limited research on phenomena like Elisa Lam's case, it's clear that her selection of the Cecil Hotel's water tank may not have been a mystery, but rather a tragic result of her psychological illness. After considering all available evidence, scientific research, and social patterns, it seems the chief coroner's initial report holds true that Elisa Lam died accidentally from drowning as a consequence of bipolar disorder. Though various theories were proposed, the lack of concrete evidence and their speculative nature led them to be dismissed. The case has captivated people worldwide because it's often difficult to accept simple, tragic explanations for unsettling events. Psychological disorders are heavily stigmatized even today, but also very misunderstood. People don't want to accept that Elisa Lam was suffering from hallucinations due to bipolar disorder because that's only in her mind, and they struggle accepting such indistinction. Instead, it's far easier to tell our own versions of what we want to have happened. Something more fantastical or intriguing than mental illness. For example, some people believe another party was involved because Lam's cell phone was missing and her Tumblr remained active for months following her death. The simple explanation for some of the confusion around Elisa Lam's case lies in the fact that her original phone was lost weeks before her trip. Additionally, Tumblr accounts often populate with posts similar to previous content for a while after they go dark, which may have added to the confusion. Many struggle to comprehend how Lisa could make it to the rooftop and into the water tanks undetected. However, this is clarified in the undisputed material facts in the motion for summary judgment documents filed after the Cecil Hotel was sued. According to Box 10, The rooftop access door is equipped with an electronic alarm system that alerts hotel staff when the door is opened. Box 14 notes that the alarm for this door did not go off at any point in January or February 2013. This means that Elisa used one of the 3 fire escapes to reach the rooftop, which was proven possible by an international guest at the Cecil Hotel via a YouTube demonstration. In addition, the motion for summary judgment reports in Box 20 that someone could theoretically access the water tank by climbing to the top of an elevator utility room and jumping down on the water tank from above. This photo depicts the elevator utility room in question, which allows easy access from a red set of stairs and a joined ladder. The leap from that structure to the water tanks is also quite negligible as seen put to scale with the size of a human portrayed here. In terms of the elevator video, our story-centric minds want to fill in the hallways on either side of the elevator with monsters and perpetrators and supernatural phenomena. In the end, what truly happened on the night of February 1st, 2013, remains a mystery only Elisa Lam herself could fully understand. What we can trust is that the unpredictability of mental illness, particularly her struggle with bipolar disorder, likely played a significant role in her disappearance. Elisa, a young woman grappling with an identity crisis and growing anxiety about her life's purpose, had been open about feeling the onset of depression and acknowledging the impulsive and reckless tendencies that could indicate a manic episode. These were signs she herself recognized, suggesting her mental state likely contributed to her tragic fate. Elisa Lam was at an age when many individuals begin to experience breakthrough symptoms of conditions like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, which can be triggered by stress or changes in environment. The unfamiliarity of Skid Row, combined with insomnia and a lack of proper medication, likely contributed to her confusion and eventual manic episode. There is no single factor that led to her tragic death. It was a combination of her mental health struggles, circumstances, and the viral nature of the bizarre video footage that sparked unwarranted conspiracy theories. This examination of her case should serve as a step toward reducing the stigma around mental illness and fostering a more compassionate understanding of her challenges. Elisa Lam was indeed a remarkable individual, full of potential, with her own passions, interests, and dreams. Her story reminds us of the importance of supporting and caring for those who face mental health challenges. It's crucial to continue the conversation around mental illness, to offer help and understanding before situations spiral into something as tragic as Elisa's. By honoring her memory, we can foster a more compassionate society and work toward preventing similar tragedies from occurring in the future.